The rain was a relentless percussion against the hospital windows, a sound that mirrored the frantic, unending rhythm of the midnight shift. Kenna pushed a stray curl from her forehead, her dark green scrubs feeling damp and heavy on her exhausted frame. 24 years old, and she already felt ancient, worn down by the perpetual cycle of beeping machines and human suffering. She was a ghost in these halls, a pair of capable hands, a soothing voice, but never a person. Invisible. Tonight, the feeling was a physical weight pressing on her sternum. The emergency room was a chaotic symphony of pain, and she was just another instrument, playing her part until the final, merciful note of dawn. In room 3, that final note was approaching for Mr. Park. He was old, withered, his breath a shallow, rattling thing. His chart was a litany of failures, a story of a body giving up. Kenna adjusted his pillow, her movements gentle despite the exhaustion clawing at her. His eyes, clouded with delirium, fluttered open and fixed on her. A flicker of lucidity, sharp and desperate. Gwishin, he rasped his hand, surprisingly strong, clamping onto her wrist. The word was foreign, a guttural plea. You must call him. My son, Kenna's training screamed at her to disengage, to call for a sedative, to maintain professional distance. But the raw terror in his eyes broke through her fatigue. He was just a scared old man dying far from home. He pushed a crumpled napkin into her hand, a string of numbers scrawled on it in a shaky hand. Please, he begged, the sound tearing from his throat. Tell him the silver dragon sleeps. It was against every rule. Using a personal phone, getting involved. But looking at his face, a roadmap of a long and difficult life, she couldn't refuse. She slipped into the sterile quiet of the supply closet, the scent of antiseptic a sharp contrast to the storm outside. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number on her own cell. It rang twice. A voice answered, not with a greeting, but with a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. It was a man's voice, low and cold as deep water. Yes. The word was clipped, precise, laced with an authority that made the hair on her arms stand up. Kenna swallowed. Hello, I'm a nurse at Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling for a Mr. Park. He asked me to call you. There was another beat of that unnerving silence. Is he gone? The question was devoid of emotion, a clinical inquiry. It's very close, she stammered, feeling foolish and unprofessional. He wanted me to tell you. The silver dragon sleeps. The silence that followed was different. It was heavier, charged. Kenna could almost hear the gears turning, the calculations being made on the other end of the line. Who is this? The voice demanded, a sudden, sharp edge to it. What is your name?
Kenna.
My name is Kenna, she whispered, her own name sounding foreign. Thank you, Kenna, he said, and the line went dead. She stood frozen in the closet, the dial tone buzzing in her ear. A profound sense of dread washed over her, cold and absolute. When she returned to room 3, Mr. Park was gone. His eyes were closed, his face peaceful. The frantic energy had vanished, leaving only the quiet hum of the machines that had failed to save him. The rain hammered against the glass, and Kenna felt a tremor of fear, a premonition that the storm she'd just invited into her life was far more dangerous than the one raging outside. The hours that followed were a blur of paperwork and procedure, the mundane aftermath of death. Kenna moved on autopilot, her mind replaying the phone call, the cold, resonant voice that had promised nothing and yet felt like a verdict. The rain softened to a persistent drizzle as the first hint of a bruised, gray dawn threatened the eastern sky. The shift was almost over. She was in the break room, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee that tasted like ash, when the hospital's sterile calm was abruptly shattered. It wasn't a sound but a feeling, a sudden, collective intake of breath from the ER floor. A shift in atmospheric pressure. Through the small window in the break room door, Kenna saw it. 5 identical, impossibly black SUVs had pulled up to the ambulance bay, their engines silent, their tinted windows reflecting the bleak morning light like obsidian mirrors. They weren't parked, they were positioned, forming a crescent of silent, intimidating power that blocked the entrance. Hospital security guards stood frozen, their hands hovering uncertainly near their belts, utterly outmatched. Then, a door on the lead vehicle opened. A man emerged, stepping out into the damp air with a grace that was almost predatory. He was tall, dressed in a tailored black suit that seemed to absorb the dim light around him. He moved with an unnatural stillness, each step deliberate, economical. The world seemed to slow down around him. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The world, it seemed, would wait. He walked through the automatic doors, and a hush fell over the entire emergency room. Doctors, nurses, patients, everyone stopped. All eyes were drawn to him, this epicenter of quiet, terrifying authority. His face was a mask of cold composure, his features sharp and elegant, but his eyes were what held the room captive. They were dark, ancient, and held a chilling lack of expression. He walked directly to the main reception desk, his polished shoes making no sound on the linoleum floor. He didn't look at the trembling receptionist. He looked past her, scanning the room as if searching for a single, specific frequency in the chaos. "I am looking for a nurse," he said. His voice was the same one from the phone, low and controlled, yet it carried across the cavernous space with absolute clarity. "Her name is Kenna." Every head turned. Kenna's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. A colleague, a wide-eyed intern named Ben, poked his head into the break room. "Kenna? There's someone here for you." Kenna couldn't move. The man at the desk slowly turned his head, his gaze sweeping past the gurneys and the 4 drips until it landed, with unerring accuracy, on the break room door. On her. Their eyes met across the room, and in that instant, she knew her life, the small, invisible, ordinary life she had so desperately clung to, was over. Kenna walked out of the break room, her legs feeling like lead. The path to the reception desk seemed miles long, a green mile of linoleum under the buzzing fluorescent lights. Every eye in the ER was on her, a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity on their faces. As she approached, the man's focus narrowed, his dark eyes cataloging every detail of her appearance, the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the cheap fabric of her scrubs, the faint tremor in her hands. He was even more intimidating up close. He smelled of rain, expensive cologne, and something else, something metallic and cold like power itself. Let's call him Jinwoo. He was a statue carved from granite and shadows. "You are Kenna," he stated. It wasn't a question. "My father spoke of you." Kenna's throat was dry. "Your father, Mr. Park? I'm so sorry for your loss." "I did what he asked." "You did." Jinwoo agreed, his voice a low murmur. "He called you Guishin. Do you know what that means?" She shook her head, a small, helpless motion. "It can be translated as ghost or spirit," he explained, his gaze intense, pinning her in place. "But in the old tongue, in the context of my family, it means something more. A guide. A soul fated to appear at a moment of great transition. A harbinger of change." Kenna stared at him, bewildered. "I'm a nurse. I was just doing my job. My father was not just a patient in your hospital," Jinwoo continued, ignoring her protest. "He was the elder of the Chongliang clan. The Silver Dragon, the name from the phone call." It clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a grieving son. This was a succession. His death was not unexpected, but the timing of it, and his final words, have consequences. He gestured slightly with his chin, and 2 other men, previously standing like sentinels by the door, moved to flank him. One had a calm, analytical face. The other's was etched with suspicion, his eyes glaring at Kenna as if she were a venomous snake. "My father's acknowledgement of you, this Guishin, has made you a figure of great significance. A symbol. His death has created a vacuum, and the vultures are circling. They see his final prophecy not as a blessing upon me, his rightful heir, but as an omen of instability. And you," he said, his voice dropping, becoming dangerously soft, "are at the center of that omen. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her confusion." "What are you talking about?" I don't have anything to do with this. You made the call, he said simply. You became the messenger. You were the last person he spoke to, with a clear mind. To my rivals, that makes you either a key to legitimacy or a weapon to be used against me. They will want to know what else he said. They will want to control the narrative. They will want to control you, the world tilted on its axis. This was insane. This was a mob movie, a fantasy, not her life. I'm not going anywhere, she said, her voice trembling but defiant. Jin Woo's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something cold and hard moved in his eyes. That is no longer your decision to make, he said, the words an iron sentence. The call you made was a beacon. Every faction in my world now knows of the nurse named Kenna. You are no longer safe here. You are not safe anywhere. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. You will come with me now. It was not a request. It was a command issued from a world of shadow and steel, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was already his. No, Kenna breathed, the word a fragile puff of air against the wall of his authority. I can't. I have a job. I have a life. A laugh, sharp and derisive, came from the suspicious man to Jin Woo's right. A life, he scoffed in accented English. You have a target on your back. Jin Woo silenced him with a single, glacial look before returning his attention to Kenna. His composure was absolute, but she could feel the impatience simmering beneath the surface, a tightly coiled spring of power. Your life, as you knew it, ended the moment you dialed my number, he stated, his voice flat and devoid of pity. You think you can clock out, go home, and forget this? You think they will let you? He pulled a sleek, black phone from his jacket pocket. With a few taps of his thumb, he turned the screen towards her. It was a live video feed. Her stomach lurched. It was her apartment building, the familiar brick facade looking sinister in the gray dawn light. Two cars she had never seen before were parked across the street, a dark sedan and a panel van with no markings. Men sat inside both, their silhouettes just visible. Those are not my people, Jin Woo said softly, his voice a chilling caress in her ear. That is the Gaiase faction. They are less patient than I am. They believe in leverage. They would not ask you to come with them. They would simply take you. And what they would do to learn what my father told you, you do not want to know. The air left her lungs. Her apartment. Her sanctuary. Violated. The mundane details of her life. Her overdue library books on the coffee table, her wilting succulent on the windowsill, flashed through her mind, relics of a world that no longer existed. The choice he was offering her was an illusion, a cruel pantomime of free will. I'm offering you a gilded cage, he admitted, his honesty more terrifying than any lie. They are offering you a slaughterhouse. Come with me, and you will be protected. You will be a guest. Stay here. He let the sentence hang in the air, the unspoken threat more potent than any words. The suspicious guard, Hyunsik, shifted his weight, his hand resting near the butt of a gun hidden beneath his jacket. The calm one, Minjun, watched her with something akin to sympathy, a silent acknowledgement of the impossible situation she was in. She looked past them, at the faces of her co-workers, now pale and frightened. She was a contamination, a danger to everyone around her. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't go home. Every door to her old life had just been slammed shut and bolted. A wave of numbness washed over her, a merciful tide drowning out the panic. She gave a single, jerky nod. It was the only answer she could give. A flicker of something, satisfaction, perhaps, crossed Jin Woo's face. He gestured, and his men moved with fluid efficiency.
Minyoung steps forward.
We will arrange for your personal effects to be collected. Your employment will be handled, he said, his tone respectful but firm. Kenna felt herself being guided forward, a ghost being escorted from her own haunting. She walked past Ben, who stared at her with wide, uncomprehending eyes. She was swept out through the automatic doors, into the damp morning air, and towards the waiting maw of the black SUV. As the heavy door closed with a solid, definitive thud, sealing her inside the silent, leather-scented interior, she looked back at Mercy General. It looked like a photograph of a place she used to know, a lifetime ago. The world she knew was gone, swallowed by the shadows of 5 black SUVs. The SUV moved through the city with an unnerving smoothness, a predator gliding through unsuspecting streets. Kenna stared out the tinted window, watching the familiar landscape of her life recede into a meaningless blur. She was whisked away to a skyscraper that pierced the clouds, a needle of glass and steel. The penthouse was a world unto itself, a sprawling expanse of minimalist design, floor-to-ceiling windows, and priceless art. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly suffocating. A gilded cage, just as he'd promised. This was the beginning of her first trial, a test of the mind. She was left alone for hours that stretched into an eternity, a ghost in a palace. The silence was a living entity, broken only by the distant, muted sounds of the city below. Servants moved like phantoms, leaving food she didn't touch, speaking only when spoken to. Jinwoo's men were a constant presence. Hyunsik, the hostile guard, watched her with open contempt, his gaze a constant accusation. He saw her as an opportunist, a weakness his new leader had inexplicably imported into their fortress. Kenna felt his scorn like a physical force, another bar on her cage. She was an anomaly, a disruption to their rigid, masculine world of honor and violence. Jinwoo finally came to her that evening. He found her standing before the vast window, looking out towards the distant, hazy lights of the hospital district. He didn't speak at first, simply stood beside her, his presence a heavy weight in the room. "They tell me you have not eaten," he said. "I'm not hungry. Fear is a poor substitute for sustenance." He wasn't coddling her. He was observing, testing. Over the next few days, this became their routine. He would seek her out and engage her in long, intense conversations. He was dissecting her, trying to understand the woman his father had inexplicably chosen. He asked about her childhood, her decision to become a nurse, her philosophies on life and death. He listened with an unnerving stillness, his dark eyes never leaving her face, searching for something. One night, he presented her with a puzzle. "I have a man," he began, "who has been loyal for 10 years. But his son is sick, and the treatments are expensive. I have discovered he has been selling information, minor details, nothing critical, to a rival. My captains say he must be made an example of. That betrayal must be met with death. What would you do?" Kenna thought of the desperate faces she saw every day in the ER, people forced into impossible corners by life. "You be killing a man who is already a ghost," she said softly. "He's not betraying you. He's trying to save his son. His loyalty is to his blood."
Can you fault him for that?
Jinwoo's eyebrow arched slightly. "It is a weakness I cannot afford in my organization." "Is it?" she countered, finding a flicker of her old self. "Or is it a strength you could harness? Pay for the treatment. All of it. Don't just buy his loyalty back, earn it. A man you execute becomes a martyr for your enemies. A man you save becomes a legend for your followers. His loyalty will be absolute, forged in gratitude, not fear. Which is stronger?" A long silence stretched between them. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his icy facade, a glimmer of surprise, of reluctant respect. He was a man who dealt in endings. She was a woman who fought for beginnings. The contrast hung in the air between them, a strange and potent harmony. The attack came without warning. It was just after dusk, the city lights beginning to glitter like a fallen constellation below. A sudden, concussive boom from the far end of the penthouse shattered the tranquility, followed by the high-pitched shriek of a sophisticated alarm system. Red lights strobed through the hallways, casting everything in a bloody, urgent glow. The Gaiase faction had grown tired of waiting. This was a probe, a violent test of Jinwoo's defenses, and a direct assault on the symbol he had taken. Kenna's heart leaped into her throat, but years of ER chaos had conditioned her. While the household staff screamed and scattered, her training took over. Adrenaline sang through her veins, not as fear, but as focus. Jinwoo was instantly in motion, a blur of deadly grace, issuing clipped commands in Korean into a device on his wrist. Men in tactical gear materialized from unseen doorways, weapons raised, forming a protective perimeter around him. Their eyes were on the threat. Kenna's were on the fallout. A stray bullet had ricocheted, and one of Jin-woo's younger guards went down, clutching his leg, a dark stain blossoming rapidly on his trousers. The other guards were too focused on the firefight erupting near the main entrance to notice. "He's hit," Kenna yelled, but her voice was lost in the din. Without a second thought, she ran. Not away from the danger, but towards it, her body moving on pure instinct. She skidded to her knees beside the injured man, who was pale and going into shock. "Look at me," she commanded, her voice cutting through his panic. The artery was nicked. He was bleeding out fast. She didn't have a kit. She didn't have supplies. She looked down at her own clothes, the simple pants and silk blouse they had provided her. Without hesitation, she ripped the expensive blouse from her shoulder, tearing a long strip of fabric. It wasn't ideal, but it would work. As she began to wrap it tightly above the wound, she saw her scrubs belt from her first day, discarded on a chair. Better. She grabbed it, expertly cinching it into a tourniquet, her hands sure and steady despite the chaos. "Press here," she ordered another guard who had glanced their way, positioning his hands over the wound. Hard as you can from across the room, through the smoke and strobing lights, Jin-woo saw her. He had been directing the defense, a cold and efficient general. But his movements faltered as he watched her. He saw her, not cowering, not screaming, but kneeling in the middle of a firefight, her face a mask of fierce concentration, her hands covered in his man's blood as she worked to save him. She was a beacon of calm in the vortex of violence. He saw a strength he had never encountered before, not the strength to take a life, but the unyielding, ferocious will to preserve one. The attack was repelled as quickly as it began, the intruders neutralized or driven back. A tense silence descended, thick with the smell of cordite and blood. Jin-woo crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping to stand over her as she finished securing a pressure dressing made from torn linen. He looked from the stabilized guard to her. Her face was smudged with grime, her hair in disarray, but her eyes were clear and bright with adrenaline. He reached out, his calloused thumb gently brushing a streak of blood from her cheek. "You were not afraid," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of profound, astonished discovery. In that moment, she was no longer a liability he was forced to protect. She was a power he had failed to comprehend. The leader of the Guyase faction strike team had been captured alive. He was a hard man with defiant eyes, kneeling in the center of a stark, concrete room in the sublevels of the building. The air was cold, smelling of damp stone and old fear. Jin-woo's inner circle was assembled, their faces grim. Hyun-sik, his expression savage, paced back and forth. "He dishonored this house. He threatened our lord," he snarled, his voice guttural. "A slow death. We will send pieces of him back to his masters as a warning." Others nodded in agreement. This was their code. An eye for an eye, blood for blood. It was the language of power their world understood. Jin-woo remained silent, his face an unreadable mask, but Kenna, standing just inside the doorway where he had placed her, could feel the conflict rolling off him in waves. Tradition and the expectations of his men demanded a brutal spectacle. His new position as elder required an immediate and unforgettable show of force. He needed to demonstrate that he was even more ruthless than his father. Then he turned and looked at her. His eyes held a silent, heavy question. He had brought her here to see, to understand the brutal reality of his throne. But he was also, she realized, asking for her counsel. He was presenting her with her third trial, a test of her morality against the unforgiving logic of his world. "Tell me, Guishin," he said, his voice low enough for only her to hear, yet it silenced the room. "What is justice here?" All eyes turned to her. Hyun-sik's gaze was a challenge, daring her to speak her soft, useless words. Kenna's heart pounded, but she met his gaze, and then the prisoner's. She saw past the swaggering defiance to the cornered animal beneath. She saw the cycle, endless and brutal. She took a step forward. She didn't speak to Jin Woo. She spoke to the captive. How many sons will be lost? How many mothers will weep? For this? For a pissing contest between men who will never bleed themselves? She asked, her voice quiet but ringing with a clarity that cut through the tension. The man flinched. She turned her gaze to Jin Woo, her eyes pleading. They expect you to be a butcher, because that's all they've ever known. Show them a king. Her voice grew stronger, filled with a conviction that came from a place of deep, unshakable empathy. Strength isn't just about ending lives. Any thug can do that. True power is deciding who gets to keep living. Make him swear a blood oath. Break his pride, but not his body. Bind him and his entire family line to your service. A living, breathing symbol of your mercy will be a far more powerful message than another dead body. It will tell them you're not just another killer. It will tell them you are a ruler. A stunned silence fell over the room. The idea was radical, almost blasphemous. Mercy as a weapon?
It was a foreign concept.
Hyun-sik looked ready to explode, but Jin-woo held up a hand, his eyes locked on Kenna.
He saw it then.
Not the frightened nurse from the ER, but a leader, a strategist, a queen. He saw a wisdom that his world of shadows desperately needed. He turned to the prisoner, his decision made. You will not die today, Jin-woo announced, his voice like cracking ice. You will live to serve me. Your life, and the lives of all you hold dear, now belong to the Chongliang clan. You will be my message. He had chosen her path. He had chosen her. And in doing so, he had irrevocably altered the destiny of his throne. Jin-woo's act of calculated mercy sent shockwaves through the clan's foundations. To the younger generation, it was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. To the old guard, the council of elders who had served his father, it was heresy. They saw the influence of the outsider, the Guishan, as a corrupting force, a sign of weakness in their new leader. They convened an emergency council, their faces like stone masks of disapproval. They could not directly challenge Jin-woo, but they could challenge his source of inspiration. They demanded Kenna be subjected to the Cheonmyeong, the celestial decree. It was an ancient, perilous ritual, a trial by spirit, designed to prove or disprove a person's divine favor. It was a test few ever survived, a convenient way for the council to eliminate those they deemed unworthy. When Jin-woo told her, the icy control he perpetually maintained finally shattered. He paced the length of the penthouse, his movements radiating a barely contained fury. They will not have you, he snarled, his hands clenched into fists. This is a death sentence dressed in tradition. I will not allow it. I will go to war with the council before I let them lay a hand on you. He was ready to burn his entire world down for her. Seeing him so raw, so vulnerable solidified something in Kenna. This wasn't just her trial anymore. It was his. His leadership, his vision, his choice to listen to her. All of it was on the line. If he refused the council, he would be seen as a tyrant ruled by a foreign witch. If she ran, she would prove their accusations correct. She walked over to him, placing a hand on his arm. The muscle beneath was coiled as tight as a steel spring. Stop, she said softly. He froze, looking down at her, his eyes a maelstrom of rage and fear. We will do it, she said, her voice impossibly calm. They want to test my worthiness? Let them, he stared at her, incredulous. Kenna, you don't understand. The ritual, it forces a bond. It will link our life forces. If the spirits deem you unworthy, it won't just kill you. It will tear you apart from the inside out, and the backlash could cripple me for life. And if I am worthy? She asked, her gaze unwavering. We will both be more, he admitted, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. The bond will be permanent, she saw the truth in his eyes. He was terrified, not for himself, but for her. In that moment, she accepted it all, the gilded cage, the violence, the impossible destiny. She had been a ghost in her own life for so long. Now, she was being seen, truly seen, and she would not flinch from the light. Then they're not just testing me, she said, her hand tightening on his arm. They are testing us. And we will not fail. The ritual was held in a chamber deep beneath the skyscraper, a room of polished black marble that felt like the inside of a starless night. A single silver brazier burned in the center, its flame casting long, dancing shadows. The elders, clad in ceremonial robes, chanted in a low, monotonous drone. Kenna and Jinwoo knelt on opposite sides of the brazier, facing each other. The air was thick with ozone and incense. As the chanting reached a crescendo, a shimmering thread of pure silver light emerged from the center of Jinwoo's chest. It snaked through the air, beautiful and terrifying, and touched Kenna's sternum. Agony and ecstasy warred within her. An electric fire surged through her veins. The bond opened, and she was flooded. She felt his centuries of crushing loneliness, the immense burden of his name, the cold discipline that held his own spirit in check. In turn, he felt her. He felt her stubborn resilience, the fierce, burning core of her compassion, the quiet courage of a woman who ran toward the wounded, not away. The silver thread became a torrent, a river of light that enveloped them both, blinding the onlookers. It was a merging, a violent and sacred alchemy of two souls. The silver light pulsed, a miniature sun born in the heart of the earth. It held them suspended in its core for a timeless moment before exploding outwards in a silent shockwave of pure energy that flattened the brazier's flame and sent the elders stumbling back. Then, just as quickly, the light contracted, rushing back towards them, not into them, but between them, settling into a single, shimmering, almost invisible cord that tethered them soul to soul. The chamber was plunged into a heavy, ringing silence. Kenna's lungs burned as she took her first breath in this new reality. She didn't feel consumed or torn apart. She felt forged, complete. She opened her eyes. They were still her eyes, but they held a new depth, a shared history, a knowledge that was not entirely her own. She saw Jinwoo, and she saw the centuries of loneliness that had just been filled. The elders stared, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. She had not only survived the Cheonmyeong, she had mastered it. The ritual had not just judged her worthy, it had celebrated her. The first to move was Hyunsik, the guard who had watched her with such suspicion and contempt, who had seen her as a poison in his master's veins, took a shaky step forward. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a dawning reverence. He dropped fluidly to one knee, his head bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the marble floor. Yeoingnim, he breathed, the Korean word for queen escaping his lips in a choked whisper. My lady, one by one. The others followed his lead. The guards, the formidable captains, and finally, the ancient, stubborn elders themselves. They knelt before her, their pride broken, their skepticism burned away by the silver fire. They were no longer just Jinwoo's men. They were hers. Jinwoo rose to his feet, his movements graceful, his eyes never leaving her. The raw fury and fear were gone, replaced by a look of profound wonder. He was seeing her, not as the nurse, not as the Guishan, not as a political symbol, but as his destiny made manifest. His other half. He crossed the space between them and extended a hand. When she took it, a gentle warmth pulsed from the invisible bond connecting them, a quiet hum of shared life. He raised her hand to his lips, his gaze possessive and adoring. The council wanted to test you, he murmured, his voice a low, intimate rumble that was meant only for her, yet it resonated with the authority of a king. Instead, they tested us. He kissed her knuckles, a formal, yet deeply personal gesture of fealty. And now, he declared, turning his head to look at the kneeling assembly, they have their queen, the word echoed in the silent chamber, not as a title bestowed, but as a fact revealed. Kenna stood, her hand in his, no longer a prisoner, but a sovereign. The transformation was absolute. Kenna was no longer a captive, but a collaborator. When she walked through the halls of the penthouse, the air itself seemed to part for her. Staff and guards who had once ignored her or watched her with suspicion now bowed their heads in deference. She was Yeowingnim, the queen, a title that felt both foreign and strangely fitting. She began her education in earnest. Minjun, the calm, logical guard, became her patient tutor, spending hours explaining the intricate web of politics, the history of the clans, the delicate balance of power she now inhabited. She learned the language, the customs, the names of allies and enemies. Hyunsik, in a complete reversal, became her shadow, a fiercely loyal and utterly devoted protector whose life was now secondary to her safety. His earlier hostility had been forged into an unbreakable shield. But Kenna refused to let this new world consume the woman she had been. She had not been chosen for her ability to command or conquer, but for her instinct to heal. She saw the vast resources at Jinwoo's disposal, the money, the manpower, the influence, and saw an opportunity. One evening, she laid out a plan for him, not for a corporate takeover or a rival's demise, but for a clinic, a state-of-the-art medical facility built in the heart of the territory they controlled, offering free care to the community. Your people rule through fear and obligation, she explained, her voice passionate. It's a brittle kind of power. Let me show you a different kind. Let me earn you a loyalty built on gratitude. On love, it was another radical idea, but Jinwoo, who now saw the world through a lens colored by her perspective, agreed without hesitation. The project became her focus, her first sovereign act. She oversaw its design and construction, her medical knowledge proving invaluable. It was a bridge between her old life and her new one, a way to wield her new power without losing her soul. The political storms had calmed for now. Jinwoo's rivals, stunned by his bold mercy and the validation of the Cheonmyeong, had retreated to lick their wounds and reconsider their strategies. A fragile peace had settled over their world. One night, Kenna stood on the balcony, the city a tapestry of glittering lights below. Jinwoo came to stand beside her, the silence between them comfortable, intimate. He took her hand, and with his other, he slowly twisted the heavy, ornate ring from his own finger. It was the sigil of the Cheonmyeong Elder, a silver dragon coiled around a black sapphire, a symbol of ultimate authority passed down for generations. He took her left hand and slid the ring onto her fourth finger. It was heavy, a tangible weight of history and burden. My father was waiting for a ghost, he said, his voice a soft rumble against the night. A spirit to guide our people out of the darkness of the past. For years, I thought he was waiting for me to become him. I was wrong, he looked at her, his eyes reflecting the city lights, but his focus entirely on her. He was waiting for you. I was just the one meant to find you. Kenna looked down at the ring, a crown of immense power and responsibility, and then back up at him. The exhausted, invisible nurse from Mercy General was gone, replaced by a woman who had walked through fire and emerged a queen. She felt no fear, only a sense of profound rightness. She was seen. She was chosen. And now she chose back. I'm not a ghost, she said, her voice quiet but imbued with the unshakable confidence she now owned. I'm right here, he smiled, a true, unguarded smile that transformed his face. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against him. Against the glittering backdrop of the city that was now theirs to command, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of promise. It was not an ending, but a beginning.
A vow.
A destiny, finally and completely fulfilled.